Halo 4, the direct sequel to Halo 3. Before I start this review, I have to say some things. I am not a Bungie or 343 Industries stan or hater. We all have our opinions and that's completely fine. I know the Halo community's opinion is all over the place when it comes to this game. So I'm going to give you my review, how I experienced it. We can have a discussion in the comments, of course, but keep it civil. Let's jump in. So right off the bat, difference in visuals is the first thing I noticed. Of course, with a new game, it's normal graphics improve, but overall the game looks really good and it's actually aging very well. I know that a lot of people don't agree with the new style of like the Covenant and how Master Chief looks. I understand that changing those things as a longtime fan aren't fun, but in my opinion I think it's good that they're trying to make it look fresh and upgrade stuff from the past. It's also a sequel, so stuff changes further and further into the future, I guess. So I personally don't see a problem with it. But something I do have a problem with is level design. Well, problem is maybe a big word, but you remember in Halo CE or Halo 3 getting into a vehicle and being able to explore as much as you want and having so much freedom in some levels. Well, that's thrown out of the window with Halo 4. Getting in a Wardog for the first time, it sends you to your first linear adventure. Same goes for like the Ghost part, Scorpion part, even the Mantis part to some extent. If you try to explore, which I tried much more when I was writing this review and replaying the game, you get a lot of invisible barriers or messages you're out of the battlefield. This feels really restricting. Most of the game feels like level design is trying to keep you neatly between the lines, which in itself is fine for a game if you want to go for that, but looking back at previous games, it's something I really miss. They took away most of the exploring. Something positive though, I mentioned it already, I actually really like the Mantis. I think it's a welcome addition in Halo. Taking down some Covenant with it was fun for sure. One level in the whole game is good enough though. Now let's talk about some characters. To start off, Master Chief. So there's a lot of character development for Chief in Halo 4. Obviously there's nothing wrong with character development, but the way they did it was pretty unsatisfying. Master Chief went from a mostly silent protagonist to a fleshed out character in a blink of an eye. I think if they eased it in more and spent more missions on it, it would have been a lot better. The cool thing about Chief in the previous games is in silent moments you can think for yourself or interpret something how you want, which makes a lot of people relate to the character. But that's something you kinda lose here. And that's why the story between Chief and Cortana feels a bit weird. It happens so fast. Like I said, I think if they spent some extra time to ease in the Chief Cortana plot, it would have been better. A new character that I really like is Lasky though. He shows respect to you and helps you out. I always had a sense of calmness around him. He's a good man. That can't be said about Palmer though. The first thing she says is an insult to Chief, which immediately makes me not like her. Del Rio is a giant ass, just for some drama. So yeah, those two, no thank you. I will get into the didact a bit later on. So we got some new enemies in Halo 4 as well, the Prometheans. And they aren't always fun to fight. So why? Why are they not fun to fight? Well, let's talk about why the Covenant was so fun to fight in previous games. They were predictable to some extent. When you saw an elite, you knew to be a bit careful. They can dodge, get behind cover, come at you full force when they're almost dead. You could also see what rank of elite they were by color. When you saw some grunts, you knew they would scatter the moment they panicked and everything was effective against them. But in great numbers, they were dangerous. I can go on and on, also about brutes, hunters, jackals. They're predictable. You can always plan your attack. So how are you going to plan your attack when Promethean Knights randomly teleport, sometimes away from you, sometimes towards you for an attack? It's just a bit frustrating to fight them, and it doesn't make it better that they are bullet sponges as well. Didn't have too many problems with the crawlers though. At least they were a bit more predictable. The Watchers were always the first thing you had to take down. It's just so much easier to fight without them reviving, healing, and shielding their friends. Some Promethean weapons weren't very effective, but I think they looked really cool, although with every Halo game I would pick human weapons over Covenant weapons and Covenant weapons over Promethean weapons. They were a bit too alien for my taste to shoot with, but that's not necessarily like a bad thing, of course. So let's get into the story a bit more. So I talked a bit about the Chief and Cortana plot already. I think it's a good idea to make a story about Cortana's rampancy, that's for sure, but like I said before, I think the story between those two was a little bit too fast to still feel familiar with Chief. Then we have the didact that wants to wipe out the humans. So the most important part for me of the story is when you talk with the librarian. Sadly, there's so much information there, it is just a bit too hard to follow, and you have a lot of questions. The weird thing is, The terminals make most of it very, very clear. And by the way, like, the terminals are amazing. But you can't expect a casual player to watch the terminals, of course. I like the didactic in the terminals, but in game he's a big question mark in my opinion. But if you look at the full story of Halo 4, with Chief and Cortana and the didact, it's actually a really interesting and good story. Good execution just isn't always there. The game ends in a quicktime event, which is not the most interactive way of ending a story, but at this point it's better to look at Halo 4 as a whole instead of picking everything apart. Although they could have done some type of fight like they did with Tartarus in Halo 2. Like, overall, it's a good story and I think people will start appreciating more and more over time as well. I'm sure of it. I also like the last scene between Chief and Cortana. Emotional, but a great ending for Cortana. And for me, the real Cortana was gone right there, and it will stay that way for me. Lastly, the music. I mean, I don't have a lot to say about the music. It doesn't feel as memorable as it did in the previous games. Although it's not bad, it just doesn't always make you feel like a badass. And that's what we want, of course. So overall, Halo 4 is not a bad game at all. The story is good, and I think it will keep growing on me. The gameplay has some obvious flaws, but it doesn't kill the whole game. I still think it's a good sequel to an amazing trilogy. If you have anything to add, definitely let me know in the comments. So that was it. My Halo 4 review. One more game in the main series to go, but I don't think I'm ready